Like we are live. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Super excited to share this case study. So as people are kind of filtering on, super excited to talk about Fernando's first deal, introduce you to my student Fernando and friend, and let him kind of walk through a little bit of his very first deal. Fernando, tell us a little bit about what do you do for a living? Like, what's your story?
Yeah, hey Kendall. So happy Valentine's Day to you as well.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, so in February of 2015, I began nursing. So I was an emergency room nurse for the first 4 years of my career. Went back to school, got my nurse practitioner degree, and I've been in the emergency department since September 2019. Um, as you know, that's my full-time job. I completed my doctorate last May, and so no more school for me as of right now. But
Yeah.
that's just I was a lifelong student, and now I'm just kind of focused on my career and trying to retire soon. So
Right on. So tell me a little bit more about like the retiring thing. What are you like? How did you go from like being a nurse and wanting to do real estate? Like what's the story behind that?
yeah, so I mean, I've been in the emergency department for the last 8, 9 years, and so I see the bad in a lot of people. I see what tragic things happen in the world. I'm just very aware of it, and it's also a taxing job. There's a lot of burnout, and there's a lot high turnover rate as far as staff and medical staff and nursing staff. That a lot of people are leaving the profession, and a lot of people, we just know our worth to a certain degree. And so it's almost like, if I want to raise a family, because I'm also newly married, one of the things is I want to retire. I want to be there for, if I have kids, I want to be there for them. And so one of the things that I keep preaching is that, there should be a point where we don't have to work. And so I've kind of given myself, a little timeline to eventually, retire 5, 10 years, or at least work on my own account and not be under the corporate, umbrella and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
so I figured, real estate is, constantly uptrending um, for a long time. And sure, it has its dips and peaks and troughs and things like that, but it's certainly on the upcline. And so one of the best ways to do that was to get involved into real estate and find somebody who is doing it as well.
Yeah.
And
Right on.
coach.
I love it. I love it. So tell me a little bit more about like retirement because like I know that people get into nursing and they get into the medical field in general just because like they have like a passion for helping other people. But like once you get in, like you realize like, dang, this might be like this is I don't know, like the lifestyle not exactly it for me, right? So like talk to me a little bit about like why you're looking to retire specifically from the medical field.
Well, I started my, the beginning of my career as a nurse practitioner was kind of a few months before COVID hit. And so I was kind of, I hit the ground running, managing patients and trying to really become autonomous in my field. And so it's just, it's a very tiring, exhausting job, and it's nice and I enjoy it. But after a while, you get tired of the shift work. And if there's a way out of that to where you can find some sort of balance with your home life and work, and again, make it your own responsibility, or your own scheduling, your own way of life, then you can dictate that. You don't always have to be under somebody. And
Yeah.
I enjoy helping people. I really enjoy it. I get phone calls and text messages daily from friends and family who also need medical advice. And I'm always willing to help, but to a certain degree, I don't. why do I have to commit, my 120 hours a month or my 144 hours a month or whatever it is? I should be able to work as much as I want, whenever I want.
Yeah.
And so that's because I also want to travel and I want to see the world, and so I figured real estate, particularly wholesaling land where you could do it virtually, is also a big plus as to why I sought out this avenue.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
So
I love it. So talking about that I mean, like, that's like reading a page out of my journal. I feel like one of the things that drew me to real estate, or to supplement my income with some type of entrepreneurial thing, is like my definition of success is just to have like time freedom, right? Like, and financial freedom, and the freedom to do what I want when I want with the people that I want to do it, right? Because I think if anything that COVID has taught us is like, hey, like, life is super short. And so, like, any time spent doing something that you don't want to do, or when you don't want to do it, or around people you don't want to be around, I think that it just kind of highlights like, hey, like, there's something better. There's something better out there, right?
right, and when you ask me, about helping people and things like that, again, I really enjoy that. I love conversing with the patient. I love getting at eye level and sitting down and actually talking to them about their care. But there's also another big aspect of practicing medicine, and you have to adhere to metrics. You have to adhere to company policies and guidelines. And
Right.
so it becomes this moving, perpetual thing in the hospital. To when you get there, you're working. You
Yeah.
get there, you see what patients need to be seen, and you admit them, disposition them, whatever it is. And so it's just, to a certain degree, I like to preach that, we've kind of dehumanized medicine, and it's just become this metric of getting the patient out. And
Yeah.
so that's heartbreaking, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of I guess the leadership, or a lot of the company, the upper heads of of companies and hospitals are really focused on metrics, and so it kind of it makes you not want to go to work. You know what I mean? I love treating patients, but I only get 5 seconds to talk to them before I have to go see the next person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
I completely get that.
it leaves, it gives the patient, it's not fair to the patient.
Right, right. Yeah. Man, I completely get that. I think that, people that go into different professions like, medicine or teaching or something like that, I think that, we all have these like noble ideas about like what the profession is, and then like you get into it and you realize like, oh man, like this is nothing like I thought it would be, not because of the actual work, but because of like the systems that we're in, so like in your case, hospital administration, and, like teaching. I was a teacher. Like, we had school district stuff that we had to, adhere to, and just made it not. We ended up doing a lot of the stuff that was so little of our job was actually like teaching, right, and making a difference. And so I definitely get that. So what I want to do is first congratulate you, man. You just closed on your very first real estate deal. So exciting. How much was that spread?
Yeah, yeah. It was a little north of 16,000. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So 16,000 on your very first deal. What I want to do is I want to walk through the process and kind of talk a little bit as a case study of like, this is what happened, this is how the deal unfolded. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some numbers that I want to walk through. So we'll kind of do this as like a little bit of a presentation here. So if you're watching this, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop the questions in the chat. We'll definitely get to those questions at the end. I'd love for you to pick Fernando's brain, pick my brain. Any questions that you have about the process, go ahead and pop them in the questions in the chat. We're happy to answer those questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen and see if I can get this to work. Let's see. All right. All right, so this is how Fernando made 16,000 plus on his very first deal. So excited to share this. All right, so very first thing you might be asking, how did he find the deal? So Fernando got this deal through marketing, right? This is one of the very first things that we do whenever we're looking for leads is we have to get those leads, find those sellers that might be interested in actually purchasing or selling their property. So how he found the deal, he actually found this through cold calling. And I want to give a shout out here. The cold calling company that we use is Lead Mining Pros. Nicholas Nick, big shout out to you, man. This is like the holy grail for cold calling. If you're interested in cold calling, I definitely suggest taking a look at Lead Mining Pros. They've got incredible services. They use American cold callers. They also do a mixture. They can do a mixture of texting and cold calling for you. And this is just one of those ways that you can get a ton of leads super, super quickly. And all of these people have been vetted by these contact agents through Lead Mining Pros. So this particular deal, he got this lead as a cold call lead. And Fernando, this was like this lead for this particular deal. This was like one of your very first campaigns with lead mining, right?
Yeah, it was my first one.
Very first campaign, yeah. So first campaign out of the gate, he got this series of leads, and this deal, after nurturing this lead, netted him over 16K. So he found the deal using Lead Mining Pros, cold calling, and this is essentially how he found the deal and locked up the deal. So first of all, the lead came in from cold calling using Lead Mining Pros, and then he called the lead to negotiate. So we got an email in from Lead Mining Pros. Hey, this person is interested. These are some questions that they answered on the call. And then Fernando called and negotiated with that seller. And then once they came to an agreement, locked up that contract with the seller. So this is how he sold the deal. After he got the property under contract, we decided to do what's called an assignment. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to lock up the property under contract and then find an end buyer and then ultimately assign Fernando's position to buy this property to the end buyer. That way there was no money out of his pocket. We didn't put any type of deposits. He didn't have to close on the property first. We were just able to gain control of the property by locking it up under contract. So once he locked it up under contract, he listed it on the MLS for a flat fee. Didn't use an agent. We went through a flat fee listing agent that literally all that they do is post it on the MLS, and it's just a flat fee. So we didn't pay any type of commissions. I think it was like we used it was Baycomb, right, Fernando?
Correct.
Yeah, and it was like 99 bucks, I think, to list. Yeah, yes. So paid 99 bucks, listed on the MLS, and then what that also does is it pushes all of the listing information to like your Redfins and Zillows, Realtor.com. I mean, hundreds of different marketplace platforms the MLS will feed into. And so for 99 bucks, he got all of these eyes on the property. So we listed on the MLS, and then the phone started ringing, right? An offer came in, we negotiated with the offer with that particular buyer, and then we sent the contract to the buyer to sign, which is a new contract to purchase, for them to purchase the property. So now we have a contract with the seller and we have a contract with the buyer. And so that's how he locked up both sides of the transaction. The next thing is, how do we close the deal? So once we started figuring out that we needed to, like what the numbers look like, once we got a buyer that actually made offers, we realized, hey, we're going to make a bigger spread on this than we originally thought. And so what we decided to do was actually do a double close. And I'll explain what that is in a second. But what it looked like is we sent both of those contracts to the title company, our contract with the seller and then our contract with the buyer. And then the title company coordinated the closing, did all of the closing documents and everything. And then the title company paid him, got paid, right? Which is the best part of any deal, right, Fernando?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about some numbers overview. This is what the numbers actually look like in this particular deal. So the very first thing that Fernando locked up with the seller was a purchase price. Ultimately, the purchase price was $50,000 for him to buy this particular property. So the seller wanted to sell their property. The purchase price that we negotiated was $50,000. So that's the A to B transaction, right? The second thing is that Fernando then sold the property to the buyer, excuse me, for 70,000. So the buyer wanted to buy it at 70, the seller wanted to sell it for 50. So that means there was a 20K spread in there. So now that we know that we had a $20,000 spread in here, we knew that we needed to restructure this deal so it wasn't an assignment, but it was actually what we call a pass-through closing. So we had some closing costs in this. First set of closing costs was the A to B set of closing costs for that transaction. This included the escrow fee, the title policy, things like that. That was about $900 on the A to B transaction. Whenever we do any type of deals, I like to teach that when you're talking to a seller, one of the big selling points for actually doing a deal with the seller, or the seller doing a deal with you, is that you're going to cover all closing costs. So we cover all closing costs. So when we say, hey, Mr. Seller, we're going to offer you $50,000 for this property, unless there's like any back taxes or things like that, they're going to get $50,000. We cover all closing costs. So that's a big selling point for sellers to actually sell with us, because they don't have to pay any closing costs when we go to do that transaction. The second set of closing costs was the B2C set of closing costs. So whenever we negotiated with the buyer, the end buyer for the B2C transaction, second transaction, we also negotiated that we would pay some of the closing costs. And then we also pay the agent commission. So the buyer came in with an agent. Remember, on our first A to B transaction, we just did a flat fee. So we didn't pay anything to the agent other than the flat fee listing. There were no commissions involved. But with the B2C transaction, because that buyer's agent brought a buyer, we paid 3% commission on that particular transaction. So on that closing, that was 3% of the commission came out to about $1,500. And so out of that 20,000, the total that we needed to pay in order to get all of that done was about 3,300, and that came out of the proceeds. We didn't have to, Fernando didn't have to put anything down, or anything came out of his pocket for this particular property. So let's talk about pass-through close. So we originally went in thinking we were going to just assign it, right? The reason why we decided to do a pass-through close is because the assignment was a pretty significant sum. So what we wanted to do was just do two separate closings. That way we had more control over the transaction. And so what we did, the way that a pass-through close works, is that first the B2C, or the transaction with the buyer, the end buyer, they close that first. So the buyer brings that $70,000 that we negotiated. So that buyer brings the 70K, and then we use that 70K to pay the seller the $50,000 that we negotiated. And then whatever's left over, that 20K minus closing costs, that's how that's what Fernando was able to make on that. So that's how the pass-through close is structured. It's usually structured all in the same day. Sometimes it's the next day. To get a title company to do this, you just have to make sure that they are familiar with pass-through closings and that they do those types of transactions. Not every title company does. So you definitely want to interview your title companies and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Is this a type of transaction that you would do? Just keep calling until you find someone to do it. This allowed Fernando to do this deal with zero money out of pocket other than that $99 that he paid for the flat fee listing agent. So this deal had some roadblocks, right, Fernando? So the
Yes.
very first roadblock we had was wrong address. So tell us about that, Fernando.
So the property I had under contract neighbors another lot, which is actually the corner lot of an intersection. And so when I went to list it on MLS, I noticed that there was already a listing for the same address of the property that I had. Come to find out, both lots were owned by two different owners, two different people. And so I had to ask our original seller if he can change the address formally. And so that required me to connect the seller with the county. And make sure that he put in his request for an address change. That way I can list it on the MLS and not have any issues
Yeah.
with listing the same address. And so that, that took a few email exchanges and a few days, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so essentially what ended up happening was the county had assigned the wrong address to that property, right? Um, so they had to go through the whole process of changing the address, and only the owner of record could do that. So Fernando had to facilitate that with the county. So that took it wasn't an overnight fix, right, Fernando? Like it took some time to do that.
Yeah, you just have to, you have to make sure that the seller is willing to go through this, and which are, we had a very motivated seller, and so he was willing to do that. I think to the point where he was like, you know what, let me drive up to the office and actually do this in person. After he had submitted he had submitted it electronically, and so he was
That
able to expedite it. But it took a while, just processing times.
Yeah. So something that I want to point out here is because there was already a property that was listed on the MLS with the address that Fernando's deal was assigned, we couldn't list on the MLS. So every single day that was passing that we couldn't list it on the MLS until this address was fixed, like that's hundreds of eyes that were not on that property. And so we had a particular period of time that we had to close on this deal before we had to extend the contract. And Fernando, we ended up having to extend this at least for the first time due to this property address thing, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So we had to actually go back to the seller and say, hey, like because of this snafu, we can't really do what we need to do with this. And so until you fix this, we can't really move forward. And so by the time it was actually fixed and the county stopped dragging their feet and was able to do something about it and change it for us, then we had to extend. That way we could actually have time to list it on the MLS. So the next issue was we extended the contract and then we got the buyer, right? So the buyer came in at, Fernando, it was like what, maybe like a week or two before the contract was set to expire.
Yes.
Remember the timeline?
It was like 2 days before.
2 days. Yeah. So 2 days before the contract was set to expire, after the seller had already extended the contract the first time, then we get the buyer. So we're all set to go. We're good. One of the things that we always ask is, are you going to be requiring a survey for the buyer to be able to close? Is the buyer going to want a survey? And they originally told us no, right, Fernando?
Yeah, they originally said, "Oh, we'll take care of the survey."
Yeah, we'll take care of the survey. We'll close without a survey because it's up to the buyer if they want a survey or not. So great. All right, we're all set to go. And then we get the close date ready. Title has scheduled everyone. And then we get Fernando, you got what was it, an email or something from the buyer's agent? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I got a message saying, my buyers are not willing to close without a survey just yet. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"So do we have a survey?" He said, "Well, they're working on it." And one thing to realize is that when you get a buyer, their agent is also eager and motivated to sell, and he wants to he wants to close and make a deal on this as well. And so if the agent for the buyer is a nice person to kind of have at the tips of wrapped around your finger in a way to where you can negotiate a little bit, and you can say, how can we expedite this a lot quicker, because they're also motivated to close. And
Yeah.
so that delayed our closing day because we didn't have a survey on hand.
Yeah. So originally they told us like, no, we can close without a survey. Then they come back and say, hey, the buyer decided that they do want a survey before we close. So this is literally the day before the closing, right? He's like, hey, the buyer's going to want a survey. Well, sometimes it can take like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I've seen surveys go like 2 months before a survey company can get out there and actually do it. We were kind of at the like mercy of the survey company because the buyer was paying for the survey. So that means that buyer chooses their own survey company. We have no contact with the survey company. So we can't expedite things. We're just kind of stuck waiting for this buyer survey to be completed by the surveyor. And so finally, I think we had to push it back twice, right, Fernando? The closing.
We did. Yeah.
So we had to push the closing back twice because they wanted the survey. So finally, like we're like, all right, now we're on the second closing date. We're ready to go. They say that they finally got the survey in, and then there is another bombshell. Fernando, tell us about it.
So we were supposed to close on a on a Thursday, and it's like, well, the buyer wants a survey. Okay, we'll get the survey. They somehow managed to get it Friday, but by the evening, after hours, too
Mm-hmm.
late to close. So okay, so we have to extend. Let's talk about Monday. So throughout the weekend, I wake up to a text message saying, "We found an encroachment on the survey of your property." And so the residential property next to my lot had about 400 square feet of or should, yeah, it was about 400 square feet of encroachment. So that's when they wanted to renegotiate the price. Um, so they wanted to renegotiate the price, and so we did, but that also required me to renegotiate with the seller, or at least talk to him about it, because there's little issues that had to be taken care of first before we can all get our monies.
Yeah. So an encroachment, for those of you who don't know, an encroachment just means that the neighbors built something over the property line of this particular lot, and the surveyor found that whenever they did the survey. And so uh, it actually made the lot smaller than what we originally thought it was. And so the seller or the buyer is like, hey, we're not going to move forward unless we get like a $10,000 discount on this property to make up for the 400 square feet plus all this other stuff. And that was just the number that they were stuck on. We need this $10,000 less than what we originally agreed to. And so then, Fernando, that $10,000 kind of put you in a bind with the buyer. So you had to go back to the buyer and talk. Like, how did you
Seller.
negotiate
Yeah.
that? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, yeah, and again, this business will run smoother than what you think if you have a motivated seller. And so this was one of the things. He also wanted to know when we were going to close, and I was like, hey, I'd love to give you your money. I'd love to close on this, but we have another issue. First it was the address change. Now, you know, there's 400 square feet, to which we can't use. And you have to add, probably another foot in between what you are going to build and what's already there, at least to have some space. And so that required a little bit of renegotiation. And I think the seller was just, okay, well, give me this and I'm good with it. And so he took down his selling price to where it became a little bit more favorable for everybody.
Awesome. So the thing that's so crazy about this is that this deal was the closing date was pushed back two times, and then we had to renegotiate with everything at closing. Like we were ready to go, and the seller is now saying, or the buyer is now saying, "Hey, we'll walk away from this earnest money that we put down because we took a $2,000 deposit down on this. We'll walk away from it, but we're not willing to move forward with this price. So if you want to do this deal, so in like we're at the 1 yard line and the deal looks like it might fall apart, right? So there was probably like a tense few couple of hours there before we were able, Fernando was able to call and talk to the buy or the seller and renegotiate and everything. But you mentioned a motivated seller. I think that's extremely important. But the other thing that I think that allowed this to happen this way, and that you were able to save the deal is because you were in like consistent communication with this seller, right? Like it wasn't like he signed and then 3 months later that's when we tried to start negotiating. Like you were in contact with the seller throughout, letting him know constant updates. So you were still building and nurturing that relationship with the seller, right?
Correct, correct. And very friendly guy, and he was, this property was actually given to him, and so he was going to make, aside from what he's paid in taxes, he was gonna come out big with just selling this property. And so he would put the pressure on a little bit as to like, when are we going to sell, and I try to make sure to answer every question that he had, and to be there, and to reach out to him on occasion during the whole, every little single process of talking to the county, talking to through title. And so I always wanted to make sure that he was CC'd in our emails, and he was fully aware of what was going on with his property. And
Yeah,
so
that's huge.
I think
That's
that, yeah, that gave him a little bit of trust, or I guess I earned his trust a little bit, through the communication. And so,
yeah,
you can't leave him in the air, and or just, without knowing what's going on, because that, a fear of the unknown, that's like kind of a frustrating thing for people. Um, so
absolutely. Yeah, and most people don't do multiple real estate transactions in their lifetime if it's not their business, right? And so I think it's easy to forget that, like, yeah, we're working on this, but the seller has no idea like what's happening. And so just being super transparent and being in constant communication, just even just to say like, hey, just want to let you know everything is still on track. Do you have any questions for me? It helps to continue to nurture that relationship. I think it's important that you nurture the relationship. You know, everyone talks about nurturing a lead until they sign. Well, then once they sign, like they're still your customer, right? And it's just a different part of the process. And you still have to nurture them through that process, because this seller could have easily said, hey, you don't want to buy at the price that we agreed to. You can't close on the day that we agreed to. I'm out. And he would have been able to do that, right? We'd had no recourse. We'd have just lost the deal. But building that relationship is so important, and I think that's really what saved this deal, Fernando, is that you were able to nurture that relationship with the seller.
yeah, and to add to that, a lot of the sellers that I've spoken to, during our cold call campaigns, and just following up on leads, some of them do fear this, and doing this, and it's not as official as going through a realtor, or some sort of brokerage company, but you have to make sure that you are transparent, and that you commit to your word, and and that'll in turn gain their trust. And so because I spoke to a few people who are like, no, I had, my neighbor did the same thing, and he lost out on his property, and it's like, well, maybe the circumstances were different, but nonetheless, you have to, reassure the seller, and make sure that your phone is always on, and if you miss a phone call from them, or you miss a text, you better get back to them quickly, because you have something that they want, and vice versa. So
Yeah, no, that's really really good insight, because I think that um, it's really easy as real estate investors to get really like dialed in on the numbers and just thinking about the deal. And the fact is, like, we're dealing with people. Like, this is a people business. And so what's your customer experience like, right? Like, I always like to say, I borrowed this from a, a person much smarter than me, said that a confused mind always says no, right? So if there's anything that they're confused about, that they're not quite sure like what the next steps of the process are, they will fill in what their expectation is. They'll make up a story of like what is actually happening if they don't really know the facts of what's happening. So you have to keep them updated. You have to constantly keep them in communication and stay in contact with them to share with them like what's going on. Because think about it from a customer's perspective. Like, they might have bought, one or two houses in their lifetime. This type of property is something that they've bought that they want to build on and retire on later. So they might have done two or three transactions in their entire lifetime. And most people think that like, hey, if you were just go to ask someone on the street, just stop them and say, hey, what's the very first thing that you have to do if you want to buy or sell a property, a house, a lot, whatever? They're going to say, go to a real estate agent, right? So already there's some education that has to happen because we are doing this a little bit differently. Especially if you want to do something like a signing or double closing, like making sure that you're really explaining what the process is and that you're taking care of what the seller needs as well as what your buyer needs. We have two sets of customers in this business. We have sellers and we have buyers. We have to make sure that everyone stays on the same page. That way, no one is like confused, right?
Correct.
So that's really, really good stuff. So what kind of questions that you have while you're thinking of some questions to pop in the chat? I've got, if you're interested in learning more about this deal or, other types of creative finance structures or things like that, you can grab our YouTube link podcast. I have an Only Land Fans podcast where I interview 6 and 7 figure land flippers about how they built and grow their land businesses. Some really, really incredible people on there. Follow me on Instagram, onlylandfans.com, got Twitter there. So we'll drop all of the socials in the comments. But what questions do you have for Fernando and myself? Let's see, I'm going to go to the chat. Any questions? Oh, let's stop screen sharing, maybe. All right, cool. Yeah, any questions? All right, no questions unless Restream is down and I can't see chat stuff. But anyway, if you've got questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or you can put them in the comments and be more than happy to answer any questions that you've got. And Fernando, I just want to thank you for taking the time to walk us through your deal and congratulations, man. So like, what's next? You got your first deal under your belt, 16K. What's the next step for you?
Yeah, we roll it over and to a little bit more marketing and grow.
Love it.
Grow and then find that kind of balance to where maybe I can cut down on some hours at work.
We'll see. There we go. There we go. We'll retire you soon enough. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. We'll get it done. Well, hey, thanks so much for spending your Valentine's evening with us. I'll let you get back to it. I know that that you're newlywed. Tell Selena I said hey. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, feel free to reach out to me. Would love to answer questions. Fernando as well. Just pop your questions in the comments and yeah, we'll go from there. Anyway, hope this has been helpful. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.